Today we're diving into one of the most calculated medical deceptions in recent memory. It's a story that starts not with a bang, but with a scientific paper that promised so much hope.
Imagine you're a doctor or a parent, desperate to help a teenager struggling with depression. Then, in 2001, you read this in a top medical journal. It seems like the breakthrough you've been waiting for. A safe, effective answer.
But it wasn't a breakthrough. It was a carefully constructed lie. A lie driven by profit that would take more than a decade to completely unravel, and it left a trail of damage along the way.
So what exactly was this supposedly groundbreaking study, and how on earth did it fool so many smart people for so long?
It all centered on something called Study 329. And, on paper, it looked totally legit. It was a huge clinical trial with hundreds of teenagers, sponsored by a pharmaceutical giant. The goal seemed simple and noble, to see if their blockbuster drug for adults, Paroxetine, could also help depress teens.
But what was really going on behind the scenes was something else entirely. The science wasn't just flawed, it was being actively twisted. Let's peel back the layers and see exactly how this fraud was put together.
Okay, this really says it all. The gap between what they told the world and what their own data showed is just staggering. On the left, you've got the promise: effective, safe, well-tolerated. On the right, the grim reality they hid in their files: a drug that worked no better than a sugar pill and, get this, actually increased the risk of self-harm and suicidal thoughts in the kids it was supposed to be helping.
So you're probably wondering, how do you hide something that serious? Well, it was a clever and frankly a pretty cynical word game. When a teenager in the trial had suicidal thoughts, which is a huge red flag, it was deliberately downplayed. They relabeled it as something vague like emotional lability, or just dismissed it as unrelated to the drug. The danger was right there, but they buried it in the fine print.
And let me be clear, this wasn't some honest mistake or a simple misreading of the data. This quote right here is from one of the company's own internal memos from 1998. They knew, in their own words, that the drug's effectiveness was not proven. That was a full 3 years before they paid to have a paper published that claimed the exact opposite.
Now, a lie this big requires a few key players. First, you have the sponsor, GSK, who funded the whole thing and called the shots. But they didn't write the paper themselves. Nope. For that, they hired a ghostwriting firm. And then, to make it all look legit, they got 22 respected academics to put their names on an article they hadn't even written.
So the big question is, why? Why go through all this trouble to orchestrate such a dangerous fraud? Well, the answer, as it so often is, comes down to one word: money. See, Paroxetine was already a cash cow for them in the adult market. But they saw an even bigger prize: the massive, untapped market of teenagers with depression. Getting a positive result in Study 329 was the golden ticket they needed to unlock that huge new revenue stream.
And we are not talking about small change here. We're talking about an estimated $10 million or more in extra revenue every single year. When that much money is on the line, well, that's a pretty powerful incentive to make sure your study gives you the right answer.
And for years, this lie worked. It was accepted science. But the truth has a funny way of bubbling to the surface, even if it takes a really long time and a whole lot of fighting to get there.
But this didn't happen overnight, not even close. The bogus paper comes out in 2001. A few years later, in 2004, lawsuits start to crack open the door and some internal documents see the light of day. But it took until 2015, 14 years after the original publication, for independent researchers to finally get the raw data and publish a reanalysis that blew the whole thing wide open.
And this huge win for scientific integrity really only happened because of a movement called RIAT, which stands for Restoring Invisible and Abandoned Trials. These were the researchers and activists who just refused to let this go. They are the heroes of this story, fighting for years to make this hidden data public so that science could actually be checked.
So when the truth finally came out, boom! The fallout was immense. It sent shockwaves through medicine and research that honestly, we are still feeling today. The damage was just widespread. First, and most tragically, you have the young patients who were directly harmed by a drug that didn't work and carried hidden risks. Then you have the erosion of trust in medical science itself. And for over a decade, you had doctors everywhere making critical decisions based on what they thought was solid evidence, but was actually marketing in disguise.
So what about GSK? Well, they got hit where it hurts, their wallet.
They paid out huge fines and settlements, and their reputation took a major beating. But, and this is a really important point, while the company paid, the people who actually orchestrated the fraud, they mostly walked away without any real personal consequences.
When you step back and look at the whole story, you start to see this disturbing four-step playbook for a medical scandal. It starts with a huge profit motive. That pressure leads to manipulating the science. That manipulation causes real-world harm. And finally, exposing that harm is what sparks a movement to change the system.
Now, is there any good news in all of this? Well, yeah, actually. This whole disaster became a powerful wake-up call. It poured fuel on the fire of movements like All Trials, which demands that all clinical trial data be made public. Medical journals got way tougher on things like ghostwriting. And it forced everyone to look much, much more critically at research that's funded by the industry.
The story of Study 329 is a chilling reminder that transparency in science isn't just some lofty ideal, it is a matter of life and death. It proves that sometimes the biggest dangers aren't the diseases we're trying to cure, but the secrets hidden in the data. And it leaves us with this one deeply unsettling question. We know about this one now, but how many others are still out there, their secrets buried in a file cabinet somewhere, influencing the medicine that you or your family might take tomorrow?